Welcome, as Matt said, to the third episode of the Mobility Frontier, powered by the SAE Edge Research Reports. This is a place where we discuss and we talk about and we go a little deeper than average on the topics that really impact the mobility, the new mobility. So today we're joined by Kelly Coyner and Jason Bittner as they discuss what is currently happening in the realm of infrastructure, both physical and digital. And those are the things that will eventually enable deployment of highly automated vehicles across different ODDs, operational design domains, and modes. Good afternoon. I'm Monica Nogueira, Director of Content Acquisition and Development here at SAE. And as Matt just introduced himself, he's Matt Wazowski out of California, joining us to support the platform. We're representing this. And behind the scenes, but sometimes she'll come in, we have Cecilia Martucci, marketing specialist, who also works with us. So before anything else, let's get acquainted with our speakers. Kelly, please.
I'm Kelly Coyner. I'm the Mobility Innovation Lead at IOOs, and I've spent decades working to bring innovation into all the different modes. More recently, I've been focusing on how do we make automation accessible to communities and ways in which infrastructure can help that. Jason.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Bittner. I'm a principal with Applied Research Associates. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm currently working on mostly planning and policy-focused areas associated with automated and connected vehicles, and including supporting the Federal Highway Administration on several AV-related initiatives. I've held research positions, university-based research positions at both the University of Wisconsin and the University of South Florida, and I'm happy to be here today.
Much, both of you, for taking the time. So you both have been working together now for almost 2 years, specifically on the development of a series in the Edge Report series, right? The SAE Edge Research Reports. So there is a story behind this story, isn't there?
Yeah.
How you got together, how it initiated. Could you tell us a little bit more, Kelly?
Well, Jason and I have been working together for years, but in particular, we've been looking at a whole range of issues in the automation space. This, though, came up when Ed Straub, who does a lot of work for SAE on standards, gave me a call and said, what happens when you talk to ADS or OEMs about whether or not infrastructure might help things move forward? And I said, you've got to be kidding me. If they don't hang up on me, then they give me a whole string of harsh reasons why infrastructure isn't there. But eventually they come around to saying, well, yes, there are some things that are helpful. And then he said, so like, what about infrastructure owners and operators? And I said, well, they're sort of all over the place. But mainly, they don't know what they don't know in terms of things, and they're really struggling with figuring out what the best ways to create things are. And so then he asked me, what's your sort of most outrageous story? And of course, he knew that, which was that the very first pilot that I was asked to come in and evaluate, they were having a problem with their AV shuttles staying on the sidewalk. It was in the middle of the plains in Texas where there was no hard line. And so what did they do? They put in landscape rocks so it wouldn't roll into the water in a pond, and they put up birdhouses. So, you know, this is really not about birdhouses, but it is, you know, the infrastructure is really important, starting with the navigation of the vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jason, what do you guys mean by infrastructure and how you're approaching the topic, right? Because there are not necessarily different definitions, but different approaches to what infrastructure impacts what or supports what. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've talked about both physical and digital infrastructure throughout this series, and overall, physical infrastructure really refers to the things that people can see when they're out on the roadway. So it includes things like the pavement that the vehicle is actually operating on, the pavement markings, the signs, signals, curbs, gutters, fences, towers, anything that's really the built environment. It's typically owned and operated by the public sector, the infrastructure owners and operators. It's what we call the IOOs as an acronym and abbreviation. The physical infrastructure can also include things like sensors for weight or speed controls, vehicle counts, weather, other phenomena. But we have talked also about the digital infrastructure. Really, this is kind of where the industry is emerging and with a lot of new questions. The digital infrastructure goes beyond what is sort of that seen and obvious piece. So it includes data and information, but it also refers to the communications networks, the bandwidth and radio frequencies for those communications. It includes the information elements that really power traffic operations centers, the travel applications that we use for mapping and guidance, and any of the other travel services that are a part of that. So it includes the network map, work zone information and updates, and all of those sort of connected field infrastructure that supports those physical elements. So both digital and physical infrastructure are important. So, Kelly and I have been working in that area, and Kelly, I'm just kind of curious, where do you think these things overlap now that we've been working on the project?
That's a very important question. Yes, please go ahead.
What I sort of put it is that, we think about smart infrastructure usually means it's not dumb infrastructure, but it's maybe physical infrastructure combined with digital infrastructure. And the curb is really probably the classic example of where these two infrastructures intersect. All of us know what a curb is. It's the thing that makes it hard to get up out of the street if you're in a wheelchair. It's a place where you pick up and drop off things, or you park the car. And it's been sort of a central element, particularly as e-commerce has expanded, also of a lot of jams, where people stop and drop off a bunch of packages. And so digital infrastructure can aid that in terms of how do you manage the curb. It doesn't make it easy to get up and down off the curb, but it can tell you where a pickup and drop off zone is, and it can also use tools like variable pricing to use the curb. So it's a good example. There are other places how we use a lane from particular times and switching it from one to another, or we toll it, or if we think about the places that different transportation systems intersect with each other. But so those are sort of the kind of the interesting things. Curbside management may be, to me, one of the most exciting issues for automated vehicles and for human-driven vehicles.
What about the mobility hubs? We had talked briefly about that.
Right. So the idea of a mobility hub is that it's the way that physical and digital infrastructure helps people make connections across the system. So if you think about freight that might be moving on an automated truck, needs a place to shift to maybe a truck that's driven by a human, or to a different type of, or maybe there's a locker there, but it's also typically where passengers are moving back and forth. And so maybe on a bus or train or a bike, or a place where they might park their car and connect to those other kinds of things. And that's the physical component of the mobility hub. But the digital piece of it may be charging. It may be information about when the next bus is coming. It may be tracking cargo and how it moves. So that's we haven't gotten to that report yet, but we've been doing a lot of work on mobility hubs.
Yes, I know you will. So, but there are other things too that make a difference, right? Such as pavement paint and markers.
Right. So, hey, Jason, you're the one who knows about what we can do with paint, other than just splatter it on each other. You want to tell us?
Yeah. The surprising thing is that we really can do a lot for both the human operated and machine operated vehicles simply with improved pavement markings. It can be as simple as using the paint to show where the lane is and help a vehicle navigate. And the important piece is that those kinds of improvements with better lane markings help not only the machine operated vehicle, but also a human driven vehicle. So what is important about those kind of markings? Contrast, reflectivity, visibility, all of which are part of sort of a harmonization effort that is really needed to move forward. Harmonizing how pavement markings are applied and used consistently across the network, make it an opportunity to improve how those machine operated vehicles consistently perform on the roadway. There are current proposals within the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices here in the United States to expand the minimum standard for pavement markings from 4 to 6 inches on certain speed roadways. So that goes a long way towards sort of improving not only the detection of where the vehicle is in the lane and how to stay in that lane, but also the prediction of how that vehicle is going to continue to operate moving forward. So the pavement markings are very important. You can do a lot with paint and tape.
Yeah. And how about connectivity? Why does this spark such unhappiness with developers? So, what is the deal?
Well, I think you and I have had our experiences with this. It's basically that. So connected technology is a very specific part of digital technology, and it relies on communication between the vehicle and the infrastructure using dedicated hardware. And nothing will stop a conversation faster than trying to talk to an OEM or an ADS developer about combining these to move automation forward. And I think the reason is that it's not everywhere. They want to have it be reliable with good information in it that is usable across different kinds of systems. The sort of worst thing is to have messages from the infrastructure that are irrelevant to the operation of the vehicle and kind of clutter things up. But I'll tell you the other thing that they're worried about, and this is one that Jason really has a handle on, which is that they're worried that this type of infrastructure will make vehicles more vulnerable to cyber attacks. And I guess, Jason, I wondered if you might opine a little bit about what we've seen in terms of those fears, but also what we can do about them.
I'd love to hear it, Jason, please.
Yeah, and I think it's been one of the really interesting things about working on this series is hearing how some of these thoughts have evolved with respect to cybersecurity issues. I do think it's one of the critical issues, of course, that this community does need to address to enhance the viability of automation moving forward. There are a lot of concerns. We've probably all seen viral pictures of variable message signs that have been hacked that warn of zombies or clowns ahead, and we've seen movie plots where bad actors use connected infrastructure to maybe get away with things or cause chaos. And I think there's a legitimate concern that it could be weaponized and the physical infrastructure used against the travelers on it. So yes, we do need to make sure that cybersecurity is addressed, and it goes beyond just the vehicles themselves, but all that connected and digital infrastructure that we've talked about so far. The ways that we can do that, of course, are through both encryption and hardening of infrastructure resources. There are a lot of lessons from some other industries, hospital networks, energy production, air travel. Those are all likely good sources. So I am concerned a little bit, but I do think that we may let some of those concerns get in the way of advances with respect to automation. So maybe it's a good idea to remind everyone about some of those benefits. I know, Kelly, you've been an advocate from the very beginning about the accessibility that these vehicles can provide for the broader traveling public.
Yeah.
This is really important, Kelly, because now that we go into greener transportation, more equitable, and so accessibility becomes like you cannot live without it.
Right. So I've been talking to different groups about automation I guess it's almost going on a decade now in this round of it. And I like to ask people, particularly sort of hardened veterans of the technology, so why do you even care about this? You know, they can be people who are advocates for it or not. And so why are you here? And the most common answer, and I've made everybody say, really, you're going to ask all 50 people in the room, is I have older parents who can't drive. I would like there to be automation. I'm going to get old someday, and I like to not have to drive. But really and truly, it's often people who are parents of adults who are on the autism spectrum, who are perfectly high functioning to be working and participating, but can't drive. And, I think that I like to call it sort of, autonomy for people with disabilities. But the problem is that the vehicle being accessible is not sufficient. We've seen a ton of really exciting work in the industry, both from the OEMs and from more of the startups, where they are designing vehicles that are much more accessible, that wheelchairs can go in, that people with visual disabilities and the like can use. But if you can't get to the vehicle and you can't get on the vehicle, then you're stuck. I mean, the classic example is illustrated by Uber, where if they can't pull it to the curb, they just leave people, in the middle of the street. And it's not just Uber, it's others, because they can't get to the curb. So the intersection of being able to drop off and unload and get on, but also to be able to travel on pathways that may not be in the road, but sidewalks in particular, it's just critical in terms of have it being fully accessible in the automation space.
Absolutely, yeah. And but this is part of a very big picture. And besides accessibility, we're also talking about automation, electrification. How does that jive into the mix?
Yeah, and maybe I'll jump in for starters. And I know we've been able to work on some pieces of how electrification and automation kind of come together. And really the key area that electrification helps in is through reduction of emissions. Both EVs, electric vehicles, and automated vehicles provide substantial benefits for decreasing those emissions. So we will recognize emissions benefits from moving towards a more electrified fleet, but we also gain from the efficiencies that automated vehicles can potentially bring. Where the maximum benefit is recognized is when we do this in cooperation or in tandem with each other, that EVs and AVs are going to be in place, and the automated vehicles are electrified. That's where we get the mass.
Right. If you can, yeah, the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah, and this applies for both passengers and freight. So it's an opportunity to make substantial progress towards reducing those harmful emissions.
Right, right. So still under the digital part in terms of automation and uses for digital infrastructure, Kelly, you have already talked about some of the things that basically are good use cases and are important situations that need to be addressed and haven't for the longest time. Would you be able to give us a little bit more information on this, more examples on we see the digital part really supporting the next level of everything?
Yeah, and I kind of want to skip a little bit ahead in what we had planned to talk about here, because I think this is a really good place to talk about that sort of concern that we have about the expense of digital infrastructure and how it gets paid for, and then what we should prioritize from that. And the biggest thing we need to prioritize is safety.
Right.
And there are some really critical safety examples. One is at intersections where we have a huge problem, not only with fatalities of people who are in cars, but pedestrians, people pushing strollers, bicyclists, people in wheelchairs who are crossing the street there. And this technology can be very helpful there. And then another one, which kind of brings together the safety issues, but also the operational issues and the priorities that we need to be thinking about on digital infrastructure, is in the area of work zone safety. And for Jason and me, this is more than just an academic exercise. We work with colleagues who are in the work zone, and Jason had a colleague recently who was very seriously injured while trying to do research on the pavement and check things out. This is a huge problem in terms of safety for people who are driving their car, but especially for people who are trying to move automated trucks through a work zone. It's also a huge operational issue because they're very difficult to navigate. So one of the things that has happened is that, and it's been led by automated vehicle developers, is the development of a work zone safety data standard so that people could use the same standard for information across.
Right.
It's been piloted and now it's expanding, and that's great. But if you stop with just a standard, you've missed the need to communicate it, the information out to vehicle drivers, whether they're human beings or ADS. And so it's another example of a place that we ought to be prioritizing that. So I think it exemplifies the safety priority, exemplifies the need to do things that benefit humans now, and also deal with something that Jason's really cognizant of, which is that we have to change the design drivers, the ways that we design infrastructure that we're planning right now and investing in right now, so it accommodates these vehicles. And so those are the things we need to invest in, and digital infrastructure is really, really critical to it.
So one question here, because one of the points that we previously discussed is also when you design this new infrastructure or the updating of this new infrastructure or of the current infrastructure, we're talking about 20 to 30 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a damn long time. How do we admit that lasts that long? How do we make this happen instead of eventually falling apart because 10 years down the road, everything changes and the road changes too? We can't be like that, right?
Well, I think what we've come to realize is that there's some other places who do that better than we do in the United States. Australia, for example, has put together a very high-level cost-benefit analysis of what things like paint you could do in the short term, and then where they ought to put in connected corridors, how they might change the design of those lanes. And so it's really through planning and thinking flexibly that we can make decisions now and on what the investment is going to be, and then adjust the design as we come closer to that point in time, because it's really the planning phase that takes that long. It's not the actual construction and design that tends to come at the end of that.
Oh, I see. So the consensus, the planning, the consensus, and the decision
Right.
is a longer process. I understand.
Right.
Let me bring Sissy in just to see if there are any questions on the chat that we should be able to bring live. Sissy, anything?
Yeah, we do have a question here. It is, do you foresee electric vehicle manufacturers starting to reframe their consumer-facing marketing messages / commercials to talk about accessibility? Or is that still years away, if ever?
Yeah.
So the question is about electric vehicle manufacturers. So I think that's already happening, and it's driven by the opportunity to redesign the vehicle in automation. In particular, I think though, and I'm curious what Jason thinks. I think that right now we have a chicken and egg issue with electric vehicles, and it probably illustrates in a really profound way why we think infrastructure is so important, and that is that we would have had electric vehicles already if we'd had the infrastructure to support the charging where the people were.
Very true.
And we didn't have that infrastructure serving this purpose in the United States until the 30s during the Depression, and we certainly didn't have in rural areas. So I think the bigger issue is will this big investment in electric infrastructure make it so that there's an uptake in the adoption of EVs right now. Jason, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I am a bit skeptical of a view that would have electric vehicle manufacturers targeting accessibility as a key area. I think the combination of automation and an electrified automation provides some benefits, but a typically available market-ready vehicle today that's electrified, it faces the same challenges for accessibility that a conventional ICE internal combustion engine vision vehicle is operating. So I don't foresee much change in that right now.
So with all this that we have talked so far, what is the conclusion, and how do we look at this industry, and how do we spot the higher energy areas? Where do you think we're going?
Yeah, and Kelly, maybe I can start a little bit too with, I think a lot of the infrastructure investments, the opportunity to really make game-changing infrastructure investments that can support the growth and application of these automated vehicle technologies is going to be reliant on first meeting that safety factor that Kelly talked about, but also recognizing that there are infrastructure improvements that can be made today that benefit both that human operated vehicle and the machine operated vehicle. So simple things getting started, but thinking about those investments that can benefit both the current vehicle fleet, let's call it, and the future vehicle fleet are going to be where we can make the most headway.
Right. Yeah.
So, Monica, where I think the energy is. I think the energy is in trucking.
Yes, and I wouldn't disagree. Yes, go ahead.
Being delivered in logistics and be able to move things in really tight spaces at a port or places where we don't. The scheduling of how we move things is very inefficient. We're idling internal combustion engines and polluting the air. And it just so happens, it's not a big surprise, that our very next report that we're doing is on the subject of logistics and partial delivery, which picks up from where we were on trucking. And then we will move into a series of things in cyber and also in this intersection of how do you make these freight systems work by using dedicated lanes, by managing the curb and the like. So at any event, I can talk about how your parcel gets to you, or your organ transplant moves by drone and on the ground in a robot, or another automated delivery vehicle, until everybody wants to go home soon. So, but it's really exciting, and we're seeing companies really there's a lot of reshuffling in the industry, but the essence is, I think this is where we're going to see the most automation, the biggest safety, emissions, and efficiency benefits.
Yeah, and I think I hate to use the cliche of perfect storm, kind of cliche, but it really is, because we also have workforce challenges. We have an industry, the freight industry, that is really struggling to put enough bodies in seats to meet the demand,
Yes.
the changing
Yes.
demand as it exists right now. And so automation, does provide some potential relief for those workforce challenges. And it goes from that first mile and last mile sort of element of it, but through the whole system as well. In the middle mile, the longer haul routes,
And the platooning.
and then things like platooning are an opportunity to minimize the need for multiple drivers. And as we move to automation, we can probably continue to see some of that workforce related issues relieved.
Absolutely. Thank you both for this very cool sessions. Any final thoughts? Give us hope for the future.
Jason?
Well, I can start. I mean, I think that while I remain sort of optimistic on this the whole growth of automation, when we're actually going to be able to see it, I still do believe that this is not a 50 years from now sort of thing. I think that we see tremendous changes in the acceptance and some of those applications that automation brings. I mean, we see them in off-road autonomy, and we see them in places like improving drayage movements in ports. So we see a lot of opportunity there. And from the infrastructure side of things, I do think that the attention has started to be focused on using public sector investments to at least set us in the right direction,
Right.
and provide some of those opportunities. So I mean, I am hopeful. We're, as Kelly mentioned, we'll be working on looking at curbside management issues. The cybersecurity approach will be, or the cybersecurity topic will be one of the next things that we're working on, and some emerging solutions I think are going to come from those opportunities as well.
Absolutely. Kelly?
I think that so I told the story about asking everybody in the room what motivated them. And the thing that motivates me is the safety components of it. My moniker is Mobility Mama. And I've lived through now 14 and a half years of teenage drivers. And they've all made it home safely. But I'm also spent a career trying to fix human drivers. And I think that we really need to take these automated tools and build the infrastructure that lets us dramatically change the safety profile. And we need to make sure that these tools are available in all communities, because there's a disproportionate number of fatalities and injuries in the same communities that don't share in access to strong, clean transportation. And so I am super excited about how these things come together, and I'm super excited about the potential for the digital infrastructure to really help us leapfrog ahead.
You all very much. Sissy, thank you. Matt, thank you. Jason, Kelly, what can I say? It's always a pleasure to talk with you guys. Until next time.
Thank you, Monica.
Okay. Bye-bye,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.